Once upon a time, on the shining shores of Egypt, stood a dream made of papyrus and flame, a place where the entire world's wisdom was gathered under one roof. Here, scrolls whispered secrets of stars and gods, of medicine and music, of love and life itself. But one night the dream went silent. This is the story of the Library of Alexandria, how it rose, how it burned, and how its ashes still shape the world we live in today. Beneath the soft shimmer of the Mediterranean, where the tides brushed the edge of Egypt's northern coast, a city once rose like a promise. Alexandria, a name that carried sunlight in every syllable. It was a meeting place of worlds, Greek thought, Egyptian wonder, Persian science, and the whispers of traders who crossed deserts and seas. The morning air there smelled of salt and crushed papyrus. Ships creaked in the harbors, their sails heavy with wind and knowledge. And somewhere within those busy docks and marble courtyards, a dream began to take shape, a dream unlike any the world had seen before. When Ptolemy the Fervent took the throne after Alexander the Great's death, he looked upon his new kingdom with the eyes of both soldier and scholar. Egypt had always been a land of wisdom, of scribes who counted the stars and measured the Nile's floods long before the Greeks could name them. But Ptolemy wanted more than temples and treasure. He wanted to gather the entire world's understanding under one roof, to build a sanctuary for thought itself. So around the year 283 BCE, the foundations of that dream were laid. The Library of Alexandria was not born with fireworks or ceremony. It began quietly, with the careful unrolling of scrolls, the hush of sandals across stone floors, and the scratch of ink on papyrus. Imagine it for a moment. The halls were wide and filled with the golden light of oil lamps. Columns rose like trees, and between them flowed an endless forest of shelves. Scrolls stacked to the ceiling, wrapped in soft cloth to protect them from dust. The air carried a faint fragrance of cedarwood and ink. In the silence you might hear a distant murmur, philosophers debating beneath domed ceilings, mathematicians tracing figures in sand, translators murmuring lines of Homer into Egyptian. Here, knowledge was treated like a living being, nurtured, protected, and shared. Scholars from Athens, Persia, Babylon, India, and beyond were invited to live and work there. Their lodging and food were paid for by the king himself. They were called the Mausion, the House of the Muses, named after the divine patrons of art and science. It wasn't just a place for reading, it was a place for thinking. Within its walls, Euclid shaped the language of geometry. Archimedes visited, his mind alive with ideas that would echo through centuries. Eratosthenes measured the very curve of the earth using only shadows and distance, and his results astonishingly were almost perfect. Outside, the city hummed with life. Marble streets wound toward the great lighthouse, the Pharos, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. At night, its flame burned bright across the sea, a symbol of the same light that glowed within the library's walls, the flame of knowledge. But what made the library truly extraordinary wasn't just what it contained, it was how it grew. Every ship that docked in Alexandria was searched for scrolls. Copies were made by the royal scribes. The originals were kept in the library, while the copies were returned to their owners. Through this gentle piracy of wisdom, the collection swelled to hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Mathematics from Greece, medicine from India, astronomy from Babylon, histories, comedies, epics, and songs. Every form of human thought was welcome. There was a sense that the library belonged not to one nation, but to everyone. The scholars who walked its halls saw themselves as caretakers of the world's mind. And for a time it worked. On quiet evenings you could imagine the sound of waves outside mixing with the rustle of scrolls inside. A gentle harmony. Nature and knowledge, sea and thought. The city's lamps flickered against the white marble, and the library seemed to glow from within, as if the wisdom stored inside gave off its own light. But dreams, no matter how bright, live in the fragile hands of history. As the years passed, kings changed, priorities shifted, and wars drew closer. The library endured, but the world beyond its walls began to tremble. And while no one yet knew it, the same harbor winds that once carried ships filled with knowledge would one day carry smoke. For now, though, in this moment of peace, the library stood unbroken, a temple to human curiosity. The scholars slept beneath the stars of Alexandria, believing that knowledge once gathered would last forever. The night was quiet, except for the sea. And in that silence, beneath the glow of a single lamp, another scholar unrolled a fresh scroll and began to write, unaware that centuries later his words would vanish into ash, leaving behind only a whisper. Here once stood the greatest library of the ancient world. Morning rises slowly over Alexandria. The first rays of sunlight slide across marble columns and ripple on the harbor waters. The city stirs awake. The voices of merchants, the distant call of gulls, the soft thud of sandals on stone streets. And above it all, at the heart of the royal quarter, stands the library, serene and alive. To the people of Alexandria, it is more than a building. It is the soul of their city. Each day, scholars arrive early, scrolls tucked under their arms. They gather beneath courtyards lined with fig trees, their laughter carried by the breeze. They come not just to learn, but to discover, to peel back the mysteries of the world and write their own names into its pages. Inside, the library glows with quiet energy. Light filters through high windows, touching the rows of scrolls wrapped in red and gold bindings. The air feels thick with thought. Every surface bears the mark of minds at work. Sketches of stars, translations of lost languages, maps of lands both real and imagined. Somewhere in a quiet corner, a young scholar murmurs in Greek, comparing two versions of a poem by Homer. Beside him, another writes in Egyptian script, preserving ancient knowledge for future generations. Their voices blend into a gentle hum, the heartbeat of Alexandria. At times, the library feels almost alive. Its halls breathe with ideas. You can almost sense the presence of the muses themselves, invisible patrons wandering between the shelves, guiding curious hands to the right scroll. Knowledge here is not a possession, it is a gift to be shared. The scholars work together across languages and cultures. Greek philosophers read Babylonian star charts. Egyptian doctors study Indian treatises on medicine. The world's fragments are gathered and pieced together, like a vast mosaic, each piece fitting just so, revealing a clearer picture of the universe. It is in this spirit that Eratosthenes, the chief librarian, stands beneath a column one summer afternoon, a stick in hand. He is studying the shadow it casts. At noon in the city of Cyane to the south, there is no shadow at all. But here in Alexandria, there is. From this small difference, he calculates the circumference of the earth, and he is nearly exact. 2,000 years before satellites or spaceflight, a man with a stick and a mind full of wonder measures the world. Others follow in his steps. Herophilus and Erasistratus, physicians of the library, study the human body with care and precision. They map the brain, trace the pulse, describe the flow of blood. They write of the heart not as a mystery, but as a marvelous machine. Astronomers chart the heavens from the top of the Serapeum, the library's sister institution. With bronze instruments and patient eyes, they record the paths of stars, naming constellations and predicting eclipses. The heavens become knowable, measurable, almost within reach. And yet, the library is not cold or mechanical. It is a place of poetry and dreams. Within its walls, the tragedies of Aeschylus, the comedies of Aristophanes, the epics of Homer and Virgil are studied and copied. Plays are performed for scholars, music played for thought's sake alone. Here, art and science are not rivals, they are companions. Outside, the city grows around it, bustling, thriving, full of voices. Alexandria becomes a beacon for those who seek wisdom. From across the Mediterranean they come, sailors with sea-worn hands, scholars with ink-stained fingers, traders carrying scrolls as precious as gold. All are welcomed, but beyond the harbor, the world changes. Empires shift, Rome rises, Power begins to move westward. The library, though still radiant, feels the faint tremor of time. Inside, however, the scholars continue as they always have, reading, writing, teaching. They believe that knowledge stands apart from war and politics, safe within the library's walls. They do not yet know how fragile that safety truly is. For now, all is calm. The lamps flicker in the corridors. The scent of papyrus fills the air. Somewhere, a scribe copies the words of a philosopher who once wrote, "Time is the fire in which we burn." He doesn't know how true that will soon become. The Library of Alexandria, the grand experiment of human understanding, has reached its height. It holds within it the breath of every civilization it has touched. It stands like a lighthouse of the mind, guiding ships not through the sea, but through the darkness of ignorance. And though the sea outside whispers softly against the shore, the future already waits, unseen, unstoppable, and drawing near. The centuries turn as gently and steadily as the tide. Outside the library's marble walls, the world begins to change. New rulers rise, old ones fade. Empires stretch, then crumble like sand underfoot. And still, the library stands, steadfast, glowing softly at the heart of Alexandria. But even the strongest flame can flicker when the winds of history grow restless. It begins slowly, not with a roar, but a whisper of war, a whisper of neglect, a whisper of time itself, eroding marble and memory alike. When Julius Caesar arrives in Egypt during his campaigns, Alexandria becomes a city caught between ambition and survival. His ships line the harbor. His soldiers march through streets that once echoed with the footsteps of philosophers. And then, one night, fire finds the city. No one knows exactly how it started. Some say the flames came from the ships in the harbor, set ablaze in the chaos of battle. Others say it spread on the wind, carried across warehouses, courtyards, and rooftops, until it reached the great library itself. Imagine the scene as quietly as possible, as if viewed through smoke and distance. The city sleeps uneasy beneath an orange sky. The air hums with heat. Somewhere in the library's halls, the first embers settle upon the scrolls. They curl softly, like leaves turning to autumn. The scent of ink and cedarwood rises, and in a single trembling moment, centuries of human thought begin to fade. There is no sound of panic here, only the hush of inevitability. A scholar stands before the shelves, his eyes reflecting the flicker of light. He knows what is being lost, but there is no time to save it. He watches the shadows dance across marble floors, and for a brief instant, he feels something strange. Not fear, but sorrow, quiet and deep. And then he turns away. When morning comes, the library still stands, but something within it has changed forever. The fire does not destroy everything, but it leaves its mark, in ash, in silence, in memory. Some scrolls survive, carried away by scholars who refuse to let knowledge die. Others vanish completely, their words turned into smoke that drifts out over the Mediterranean and disappears into the dawn. The library is rebuilt in parts, expanded, restored, renewed, but it is never quite the same. The fragile unity of knowledge begins to fracture. The scholars who once came from every corner of the world now arrive more rarely. Politics, religion, and the shifting priorities of kings weigh heavy upon the once boundless halls. Time moves forward again. The Roman Empire claims Egypt. The world grows louder, more divided, more distracted. And in the midst of this, the library continues to fade, not in fire, but in forgetfulness. Books decay, translations are lost, and the air of curiosity that once filled every corridor grows thin. Centuries later, new stories arise, of temples and smaller libraries built in the library's shadow, of philosophers who still teach beneath its columns, of scribes who copy and preserve what they can. But the great dream itself, that one place could hold all human knowledge, begins to slip away. When the final curtain of time falls over Alexandria's ancient quarter, No one can say exactly when the last scroll was read. There is no single day, no final fire, no witness to the end. The library simply passes into silence like a candle burning low. What remains are memories, echoes carried through generations. A few fragments of texts, quoted by later scholars, a handful of names, and a story. The story of a place where humanity once tried to know itself completely. The sea, eternal and patient, continues to lap against the city's shores. The same waves that once brought ships filled with scrolls now wash gently over the stones of a forgotten harbor. The air still smells faintly of salt and wind. And somewhere beneath the modern streets, the ghost of the library sleeps, buried, in dust, waiting in dreams. It is said that those who walk the quiet paths near the ancient ruins at night sometimes feel a strange calm, as if the city remembers, as if the whispers of philosophers and poets still drift across the breeze. The library may be gone, but the longing it kindled, the desire to seek, to learn, to understand, still lingers, like light that never truly dies. Morning returns to Alexandria. The waves roll against the same shore they have touched for thousands of years. The gulls circle lazily in the sky and the light spreads across the water golden and calm. The city has changed, rebuilt, reimagined. Yet beneath the surface, the memory of what once stood here still hums, faint but unbroken. Though the library itself was lost, its dreams survived, scattered like seeds upon the wind. From those, ashes rose new centers of learning, far from Egypt's coast but bound by the same quiet devotion to knowledge. In the east, across the desert and the sea, another city begins to glow centuries later, Baghdad. Under the Abbasid caliphs, a great library and research center is born, the House of Wisdom. There, in bright halls filled with ink and sunlight, scholars from all lands gather once again. They translate the surviving works of Greek philosophers and Egyptian astronomers, preserving the fragments that had escaped Alexandria's fall. The wisdom of the ancients, Euclid, Galen, Aristotle, is given new life in Arabic script. It is as if the spirit of the library had traveled through time, whispering, "Do not let knowledge die." In Baghdad, new discoveries bloom. Mathematics, medicine, astronomy. Old scrolls spark new questions, and once again the flame of understanding burns quietly, steadily, across generations. And farther west, that same light moves again. Centuries pass, the world turns. In Cordoba, in Toledo, in Venice, the manuscripts copied from copies of Alexandria's lost texts appear once more. Europe awakens to a new dawn, the Renaissance, a rebirth of art and science born from fragments that once lined the shelves of the great library. Painters study geometry to capture perspective. Astronomers trace the heavens with instruments whose designs began in ancient Egypt. Doctors study anatomy with curiosity kindled by words written 2,000 years before. Even in their absence, the voices of Alexandria's scholars continue to guide them. Every book that is opened, every question that is asked, carries a little of that original dream, that belief that knowledge connects all people, across time and distance. And though we can only imagine what was truly lost, the thousands of scrolls turned to dust, the forgotten poems and vanished maps, what remains is something larger than parchment and ink. It is the idea that wisdom, once shared, never fully disappears. It travels quietly through memory and imagination, through one mind to another, like fire passed from torch to torch. Today, in our modern age, the Library of Alexandria lives again in spirit. A new library stands on Egypt's shore, the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, a monument of glass and stone facing the sea. Its curved walls catch the morning light, just as the old library's marble once did. Inside, millions of books rest beneath the watch of scholars, readers, and dreamers. They come from every corner of the world, drawn by the same ancient desire to learn, to question, to remember. If you were to walk its quiet halls, you might hear the faint echo of history. You might imagine the voices of those who once gathered here. Euclid, Eratosthenes, Hypatia, their words carried forward across centuries. The sea outside still whispers the same lullaby it once did to the old harbor, and if you close your eyes, it feels as though time itself pauses, as though the library has never truly gone, only changed its shape. For in truth, the Library of Alexandria was never just a place. It was a dream. The belief that the world's knowledge belongs to everyone, that curiosity is sacred, and that understanding each other makes us whole. Even now, as night falls again over the Mediterranean, that dream continues. The stars above shine as they did in Eratosthenes' time. The moonlight drifts softly across the water, brushing the modern city in silver. Somewhere a reader turns a page. Somewhere else, a teacher shares an idea. And in those small, quiet acts, the library breathes again. The story of Alexandria is not one of loss, but of endurance. Knowledge, like light, may be hidden for a time, but it never dies. It moves with us, through us, waiting for the next hand to hold it, the next mind to understand it, the next heart to keep it alive. So as you drift towards sleep, imagine the sea outside that ancient city, the soft rhythm of the waves, the glow of lanterns on marble, the hush of scholars deep in thought. The library stands once more in your mind, endless and eternal, filled with the quiet music of wisdom. And there, in that silence, the story of humanity continues, not in flames, not in ashes, but in the gentle turning of a page. They called it the City of Light, not because of lanterns or torches or the shimmer of the sea that brushed its harbors, but because of what it illuminated inside the human mind. Alexandria, a city born from the dream of a conqueror, nurtured by kings and destined to become the greatest center of knowledge the ancient world had ever known. It began, like all great stories, with a vision. Alexander the Great, standing on the shores of Egypt around 331 BCE, looked out over the glittering Mediterranean. The wind carried salt and promise. He saw more than coastline and sand. He saw the perfect meeting place between East and West, a bridge between the old worlds and the new. And there, on that sun-drenched edge of Africa, he commanded the creation of a city that would bear his name, Alexandria. But the Alexandria that would later shine brightest was not just Alexander's dream. It was the dream of those who came after him. When the conqueror died young, his vast empire fractured. Egypt fell under the rule of one of his generals, Ptolemy. And it was Ptolemy who took Alexander's vision and shaped it into something far greater, a city of the mind. Under the Ptolemies, Alexandria blossomed. Its great lighthouse, the Pharos, became one of the wonders of the ancient world, a blazing torch guiding ships safely into the bustling harbor. But the true light of Alexandria burned not in stone or fire, but in parchment and ink. In the heart of the city rose a place unlike any other, the great Library of Alexandria. Imagine walking through its doors for the first time. The scent of papyrus fills the air. Columns rise like forest trunks, and every wall seems to whisper. Rows upon rows of scrolls stretch into shadow. Thousands, tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of texts. The wisdom of civilizations gathered in one place. Greek philosophy, Egyptian science, Persian astronomy, Indian mathematics. It was a temple to the human mind. Here, scholars didn't just read, they discovered. They debated, calculated, and dreamed. They pushed the limits of what could be known. This was where the boundaries between disciplines blurred. Astronomy, mathematics, philosophy, all merged in a single pursuit, understanding the universe and humanity's place within it. Among those who walked these echoing halls was a man named Euclid, quiet, precise, and endlessly curious. He took the scattered knowledge of geometry that had existed for centuries, from the Egyptians who measured their fields after the Nile's floods, to the Greeks who sought perfect forms, and he organized it. His book, The Elements, became a foundation stone of mathematics. 2,300 years later, every student who opens a geometry textbook still walks in Euclid's footsteps. His logic, his proofs, his clarity, all were born here, beneath the vaulted ceilings of Alexandria, Then there was Archimedes. Although born in Syracuse, he studied and corresponded with scholars in Alexandria. He was a thinker who lived with one foot in theory and the other in the real world. The man who shouted "Eureka" in his bathtub after discovering the principle of buoyancy. That same Archimedes used Alexandrian methods, Alexandrian instruments, and Alexandrian inspiration. His work on levers, pulleys, and the mathematics of shapes echoed through the centuries. "Give me a place to stand," he said, "and I will move the earth." In a way, Alexandria gave him that place. And in those same corridors walked Eratosthenes, the man who measured the world. With nothing more than shadows, sticks, and the brilliance of his mind, he calculated the circumference of the earth with astonishing accuracy. He realized that at noon in Sienne, the sun stood directly overhead, while in Alexandria it cast a shadow. From that simple observation, he derived the size of the planet, a discovery so profound it would not be surpassed for nearly 2,000 years. The library was his observatory, his laboratory, his universe. To walk through Alexandria was to walk through a living conversation, a dialogue between minds that refused to rest. Astronomy and mathematics danced together under the Egyptian sun. Philosophers debated the nature of reality while engineers designed water clocks and astrolabes. Physicians studied anatomy using the scrolls of Hippocrates and their own observations. The city pulsed with ideas. Ships arrived daily, bringing not only goods but manuscripts, travelers, thinkers, dreamers. And yet it wasn't just about the scholars. The city itself was a marvel of design. Streets laid out in perfect grids, wide boulevards lined with marble colonnades, gardens bursting with exotic flowers. The air smelled of spice, sea, and ink. Markets hummed with languages: Greek, Egyptian, Hebrew, Persian. In the great museum, scholars lived together in community, eating, sleeping, studying, and sharing discoveries. It was part university, part monastery, part think tank. The word museum itself came from the Muses, the divine patrons of art and science. Here, knowledge was not merely preserved, it was celebrated. There was a rhythm to Alexandrian life. At dawn, scholars gathered to read under the soft light streaming through the columns. Midday, debates echoed in courtyards. At night, torches flickered as astronomers traced the heavens from rooftops, charting stars whose names still guide us today. The city truly lived up to its name, a beacon of intellect shining across the known world. But no light burns forever, without tending. And the greater the flame, the longer the shadow it casts. As centuries passed, Alexandria's brilliance attracted envy and turmoil. Wars, politics, and shifting empires pressed upon it. When Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt, drawn into the civil war between Cleopatra and her brother, the city's fate wavered. In the chaos of battle, fire spread, and with it the first whispers of tragedy. Scrolls turned to ash. Knowledge, priceless, irreplaceable, lifted into the night sky as smoke. Yet Alexandria endured. The library was rebuilt, replenished. Scholars returned. Cleopatra herself welcomed thinkers from across the world, adorning her court with intellect as much as with beauty. For a time, the light flickered back to life. But history can be cruel. Centuries later, as the tides of empire shifted once more, Alexandria's light dimmed for good. Whether through accident, neglect, or deliberate destruction, the Library of Alexandria eventually fell silent. Its scrolls lost, its knowledge scattered to the winds. What remains is not ash, but legacy. The ideas born in that city did not vanish. They traveled, through Rome, through Byzantium, through the Islamic Golden Age, and into the Renaissance. Every age that cherished reason carried a spark of Alexandria within it. When the scholars of Baghdad built their great house of wisdom, they echoed the model of the Alexandrian Museum. When European thinkers rediscovered classical science, they were uncovering the buried bones of Alexandria's dream. And so, even though its walls crumbled and its scrolls burned, Alexandria never truly died. Its light simply moved into the minds of those who came after. Think of the sheer ambition of it. A single city daring to gather the entire world's knowledge. To read, copy, and preserve every book from every culture it could reach. Ships entering the harbor were searched for scrolls which were borrowed, copied, and returned, or sometimes kept. It may sound possessive, but it was driven by a hunger for understanding. The Alexandrians wanted to know everything. The stars, the earth, the gods, the human body, the logic of language, the geometry of existence. They believed that knowledge was sacred, that truth was the most divine of pursuits. The scholars there weren't confined by today's labels: scientist, philosopher, mathematician. To them, it was all one: the study of reality. A mathematician might debate ethics, a philosopher might invent an astronomical device. The boundaries between science and philosophy hadn't yet been drawn, and that made their thinking expansive, pure, wonder-driven. In that sense, Alexandria was humanity's first experiment in collective intelligence, an ancient internet made of scrolls and minds instead of circuits and screens. Each scholar built upon the works of others, ideas layered upon ideas. The geometry of Euclid influenced the physics of Archimedes. The measurements of Eratosthenes shaped geography. The catalogue of stars compiled by Hipparchus inspired navigation and timekeeping for centuries. The city became a node in the great web of human thought. It's almost haunting to think how much was lost. Historians still debate the number of works destroyed. Some say 40,000 scrolls, others 400,000. The exact figure doesn't matter. What matters is that entire worlds of knowledge vanished. Plays we'll never read. Theories we'll never test. Names of thinkers now reduced to silence. But loss does not erase influence. Even in its absence, Alexandria's example continues to challenge us, to preserve knowledge, to share it, to never let curiosity die. When we look at our modern libraries, universities, observatories, even our digital archives, we're seeing the descendants of that ancient dream. Every scientist who asks why, every philosopher who wonders what if, every historian who seeks to understand how, they all walk unknowingly through the corridors of Alexandria. Today, if you visit the city, modern Alexandria, standing on the same shore where Alexander once stood, you can still feel echoes of the past. The sea still crashes against the rocks of the harbor. Somewhere beneath the waves lie the remains of the old lighthouse, its great stones resting in silence, and on the surface stands a new library, the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, built in 2002 as a tribute to the lost original. Its architecture gleams like a rising sun. Inside, it holds millions of books, digital archives, and the voices of scholars from every corner of the earth. It is a resurrection, not of walls or scrolls, but of spirit. The city of light burns again. But it's not the marble or the manuscripts that matter most. It's the idea. The belief that knowledge is worth protecting, that truth belongs to all. That learning is not a luxury of kings, but the birthright of humankind. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. The murmur of scholars deep in debate, the rustle of papyrus, the scratch of quills, the faint echo of footsteps on stone. You can imagine Eratosthenes leaning over his instruments, Euclid drafting his perfect diagrams, Archimedes lost in thought. You can hear the hum of the universe, the same hum they listened for, the same one we chase today through telescopes and equations. Alexandria teaches us that knowledge is fragile but also immortal. It can burn, but it cannot die. It finds new vessels, new voices. It moves through time like light through glass, bending, refracting, but never fading completely. And maybe that's what the City of Light truly was. Not a place, but a state of mind. A belief that somewhere, in the vast expanse of the unknown, there's always something more to learn. That curiosity is the purest form of hope, because as long as someone looks up at the stars and wonders, as long as someone writes, teaches, studies, or dreams, Alexandria still lives. The city was built on sand, but its foundation was the mind. Its lighthouse guided ships, but its library guided civilizations. And though the sea claimed its stones and fire its scrolls, its light still reaches us. Across centuries, across oceans, through every spark of discovery that flickers in a human heart. Alexandria was not just a city, it was humanity at its brightest. Daring to think, daring to ask, daring to know, the city of light still shines, not in marble halls or towering beacons, but in us. They came from every corner of the known world. Merchant ships heavy with grain, wine, papyrus, and precious cargo. But in Alexandria, even before sailors unloaded their goods, there was something else the port officials sought. Not gold, not silk, not spices. They were searching for scrolls. Every vessel that docked in the great harbor was inspected. Among the amphorae and crates, among the fabrics and spices, guards and scribes looked for written works. Any kind of text, from the simplest sailor's log to the grandest philosophical treatise. The order came from the Ptolemies themselves. Any book, any scroll entering Alexandria must be copied. The originals, the most precious objects of all, would stay within the city, in the Library of Alexandria, while the owners received finely made duplicates written on the same papyrus with the same care. Most accepted the trade, some objected, all understood. The Ptolemies were building something that transcended commerce or conquest. They were building the memory of the world. It's hard to imagine what that must have looked like. The harbor was a vast, living machine of sails, masts, and voices. The air smelled of salt and ink. Somewhere between the noise of the market and the cry of the gulls, the scroll inspectors moved quietly, collecting their finds. The manuscripts, rolled, tied, labeled, were carried to the scribes. The libraries. Copyists worked day and night, their hands stained dark with ink, their eyes straining in the flicker of oil lamps. When the copy was complete, the original joined the growing mountain of knowledge that filled the library's halls. In time, there were hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Some accounts say 400,000. Others say 700,000. The exact number is lost to history, but what we do know is that no other collection on Earth came close. Every subject was welcome. Myths and mathematics, poems and prescriptions, rituals, recipes, and revolutions of the mind. The library didn't discriminate between sacred and secular, between Greek and foreign. If it could be written, it belonged. If it contained knowledge, it deserved preservation. Think about the magnitude of that ambition. To gather every story, every discovery, every word ever spoken worth remembering. It wasn't enough to conquer lands. Alexandria wanted to conquer ignorance. The scrolls became its weapons, its treasures, its reason for being. Each one was a voice, a thread in the vast web of human understanding. A scroll from Athens might hold the dialogues of Plato, exploring the nature of justice. Another from Babylon could contain star charts mapping the heavens. From India came treatises on medicine and philosophy. From Egypt, wisdom written in hieroglyphs older than any kingdom of the Greeks. There were myths of gods and heroes, plays that made men laugh and cry, poems sung by long-dead bards, and the secrets of healers who'd mixed herbs beneath desert suns centuries before. In those tightly rolled scrolls lay the fingerprints of countless civilizations. The librarians of Alexandria were not mere caretakers. They were seekers, translators, editors, and explorers of meaning. They compared versions of the same text, corrected mistakes, and sought truth in the margins. The chief librarian, a position of immense prestige, oversaw the entire operation. Men like Zenodotus, Callimachus, and later Eratosthenes held the post. Each left his mark. Callimachus, for instance, created what was perhaps the first catalog system in history, an index of every work in the library. It listed titles, authors, and summaries, organizing the chaos of wisdom into order. His Panax became the ancestor of every library catalog that followed. Even our modern systems, in their own way, owe him a debt. To be a scholar in Alexandria was to live at the center of the intellectual universe. Imagine standing in those vast halls, columns of limestone stretching high above, the air thick with the faint perfume of papyrus and oil. Light filtered through narrow windows, illuminating the delicate curls of Greek script. Scribes sat at long tables hunched over parchment, copying, annotating, debating. The soft murmur of voices rose and fell, a music of minds at work. Scrolls lay everywhere, on shelves, in baskets, on the floor. The wealth of nations, transcribed into ink and thought. There was a sacred quality to it. Knowledge was treated, almost as divine essence, something too powerful and pure to be left to decay. The act of copying a scroll was a kind of prayer. The pen became a bridge between past and future, between one civilization and the next. Every letter drawn was an act of faith that truth could endure time. And yet behind that reverence was a bold, almost audacious hunger. The Ptolemies didn't want Alexandria merely to possess knowledge. They wanted it to dominate it. According to ancient accounts, when they learned that Athens' great library contained original works of the tragedians, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, they requested to borrow them. Athens, honored by the royal interest, agreed, on the condition that Alexandria deposit a huge sum of money as a guarantee for their return. The Ptolemies accepted the terms, received the manuscripts, had copies made, and then sent the copies back. The originals remained in Alexandria. The Athenians protested, but the Ptolemies kept the precious texts, forfeiting the deposit without hesitation. Knowledge to them was worth any price. The library itself stood within a grand complex known as the Museion, the Temple of the Muses. It wasn't merely a storehouse of scrolls, but a living organism of study and creation. Scholars lived there, studied there, and were supported by the royal treasury. Their task was not only to preserve knowledge, but to expand it. In those chambers, they dissected animals, measured the stars, developed theories of language, and refined systems of logic. The scrolls were not static objects, they were alive, continually reinterpreted, their ideas reborn through discussion. To the outside world, Alexandria's hunger for books became legendary. Traders knew that if they carried a scroll, even a modest one, it might fetch favor in Egypt. Diplomats brought texts as gifts to please the Ptolemaic kings. The city became the gravitational center of learning. If a philosopher wanted to teach, if a poet sought an audience, if a physician wished to study anatomy, Alexandria was where they went. And so the scrolls came, from ships, from gifts, from wars, and from distant lands eager to share or to trade. Some were copied in the great library itself. Others were stored in its satellite branch, the Serapeum, which stood near the temple of Serapis. Together they formed an empire of thought. Within these scrolls, vast realms unfolded. The sciences flourished: astronomy, geometry, medicine, geography. In one text, Euclid laid out the principles of geometry with such precision that they remain untouched by time. In another, Herophilus recorded detailed studies of the human body, identifying the brain as the seat of thought. Eratosthenes, reading reports and comparing measurements from different cities, used the scrolls to calculate the circumference of the earth with astonishing accuracy. They read, questioned, and reasoned, turning the ancient world's chaos into understanding. But it wasn't only science. The shelves groaned with epics, hymns, dramas, and histories. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey were studied, copied, and preserved here, with scholars analyzing every word, trying to trace the poet's origins. They compared different versions, corrected lines, and debated meaning. Poetry from distant lands mingled with sacred texts. Alexandria became the world's greatest conversation, written on papyrus. There was a rhythm to the place, a hum that never stopped. Day after day, scrolls were opened, copied, translated. The scribes became artisans of eternity. Every ink stroke was a promise that no thought once captured would vanish. And yet, they must have known how fragile their mission was. Papyrus was delicate. Fire and humidity were its enemies. But the dream was too vast to be slowed by fear. The Alexandrians believed they were building something indestructible, a fortress made not of stone but of words. At its height, the library was not merely the largest collection of texts. It was the living memory of humanity, Through its scrolls, the wisdom of Egypt met the philosophy of Greece, the astronomy of Babylon, the medicine of India, the mathematics of Persia. It was a dialogue across ages and continents. And in that dialogue, civilization grew. But for all its grandeur, the library also represented a paradox. To gather all the knowledge of the world into one place was both magnificent and impossible. Each scroll was only a fragment, a sliver of a larger truth. The more they collected, the more they realized how much they did not yet know. The dream of completeness forever danced just beyond reach, and yet they kept collecting, driven by the hope that if they gathered enough voices, the universe itself might speak. Think of the hands that touched those scrolls, the scholars, the sailors, the scribes, the rulers. Each left a mark, unseen, but enduring. Some scrolls carried stains of oil or salt from long voyages. Some bore the neat annotations of philosophers arguing across time. Each one had lived a life, written, read, copied, carried, lost, and found again. Each one carried a fragment of the human story. And then, as centuries passed, that great story began to fade. Wars came and went. Flames found their way to parchment. The sea wind grew colder. We do not know exactly how it ended, whether it was burned in the chaos of Caesar's war, destroyed under the Romans, or finally lost under the decree of later rulers who saw no value in pagan knowledge. All we know is that one day the copying stopped. The ink dried. The voices fell silent. And the scrolls of the world, those countless vessels of wisdom, vanished. Yet their influence did not. Fragments of Alexandrian thought survived, scattered, through quotations and commentaries, carried eastward into Syria, Persia, and beyond. When the scholars of the Islamic Golden Age began collecting and translating Greek works, they were continuing the same mission, gathering, preserving, and expanding knowledge. The chain of learning that began in the Great Library stretched across centuries, connecting ancient Alexandria to Baghdad, Cordoba, and finally to the libraries of Europe. The dream of the Ptolemies, though broken, never truly died. Today, when we think of the Library of Alexandria, we often imagine its destruction, the flames, the loss, the tragedy. But maybe we should think instead of its triumph. For centuries, it succeeded in doing what few civilizations have even attempted, to unite the world's knowledge under one roof. To believe that understanding could be infinite. To act on that belief. If we could stand in that harbor again, watching the ships come in, we'd see more than trade. We'd see the heartbeat of civilization. The endless journey of words, ideas, and stories moving across water, from one hand to another. Each scroll a bridge between worlds, and if you listen closely, you can almost hear them still. The rustle of papyrus, the soft crackle of parchment, the faint whisper of a scribe reading aloud, ensuring every word is right. You can feel the devotion in their craft, the steady pulse of curiosity that never truly faded. Because in the end, the scrolls of the world weren't just written by hand. They were written by humanity's desire to know itself. And that desire still lives in us. Every book, every data file, every archive, every library we build, they are all descendants of that same ancient hunger. The same belief that knowledge once shared can outlive empires. The scrolls of Alexandria may be gone, but their spirit endures in every act of learning. The city's dream still sails the seas of time, carried not by ships anymore, but by us. The scrolls of the world were never lost. They just changed form. They say the greatest tragedies don't happen all at once. They unfold slowly, almost quietly, until one day you look around and realize that something irreplaceable is gone. The fall of the Library of Alexandria was like that. Not a single night of flames, not one act of war or vengeance, but a long unraveling. A slow fire that burned not only scrolls but spirit, the fire that never truly stopped. For centuries, the library had stood as the pride of the Mediterranean world, its shelves heavy with the voices of poets and philosophers, its halls echoing with the steps of scholars. But time, as it always does, began to press in. Power changed hands, kings fell, empires shifted, And with every change, the library faced new dangers, not all of them visible, not all lit by torches. When Julius Caesar came to Egypt in 48 BCE, chasing his rival Pompey and entangling himself in Cleopatra's war for the throne, Alexandria became a battlefield. The once peaceful city, home to scholars and sailors, filled with the thunder of siege engines and the shouts of soldiers. Ships burned in the harbor to block enemy fleets, and the flames leapt from deck to dock, carried by the dry wind. Ancient writers tell us that the fire spread beyond the port, that it reached the warehouses where scrolls were stored, scrolls awaiting their place in the library. In that chaos, thousands of manuscripts turned to ash. Smoke rose above the city that had once been a beacon of learning. It is said that Caesar wept for the loss, though even he could not measure its scale. But was that the end? Probably not. The great library itself may have survived that first disaster. The evidence is uncertain, scattered like fragments of a burned page. Some historians believe only the annex near the harbor, the storage depots for imported scrolls, was destroyed. If that's true, then the core of the library endured, wounded but alive. Scholars kept working, kept copying, kept teaching. The fire had scarred Alexandria, but it had not silenced it. Still, something had changed. The Ptolemies, once passionate patrons of knowledge, had grown weaker. Rome's shadow loomed over Egypt, and when Cleopatra died and her kingdom became a Roman province, the age of royal scholarship began to fade. The library no longer had a king to protect it, a treasury to fund its copyists, or a vision to guide its mission. Slowly, the scribes' lamps went out one by one. Over the following centuries, Alexandria remained a city of importance, a bustling port, a crossroads of trade. But its mind began to dim. Fires came again, not always by accident. In the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE, waves of conflict rolled through the empire. The city was attacked, defended, and attacked again. Each time, buildings burned. Each time, memory thinned. There is a story from around 270 CE, during the reign of Emperor Aurelian, when the city was once more torn by war. The fighting, fierce and desperate, destroyed the district called Bruchion, the very quarter where the library had once stood. If any part of it had survived since Caesar's day, it may have perished then, lost amid the smoke and rubble of civil war. But even that may not have been the final blow, for Alexandria was not defined by a single building. Its scholars had long maintained a secondary library within the Serapeum, a grand temple complex dedicated to Serapis, a god who embodied the fusion of Greek and Egyptian faiths. This smaller library, the daughter of the Great One, carried on the tradition of study. It housed thousands of scrolls and was tended by philosophers who still believed in the old dream, that all knowledge was sacred. Then, in the late 4th century, the world changed again. Not through invasion this time, but through belief. The rise of Christianity had transformed the empire's heart. In 391 CE, Emperor Theodosius I declared pagan temples illegal, ordering their closure. Zeal swept the empire, and in Alexandria it flared into violence. Mobs clashed in the streets, followers of the new faith against defenders of the old. The Serapeum became a fortress, and when it fell, the temple was destroyed. Its statues were smashed, its altars torn down, its scrolls, perhaps the last remnants of the library's vast collection, scattered or burned. Some say that was the true end of the Library of Alexandria. Others claim that fragments survived even beyond that, hidden in private collections or monasteries, lingering for another generation. But by the dawn of the 5th century, the dream that once illuminated the world was gone. The great halls were silent. The scholars were dead or dispersed. The scrolls that once numbered in the hundreds of thousands had become dust. Yet to say the library was destroyed in one act is to misunderstand the nature of its death. Fire is dramatic. It makes for legend, but neglect is quieter and far more patient. After each blaze, after each war, after each wave of conquest, someone could have rebuilt the library. Someone could have gathered new scrolls, trained new scribes, reopened its doors. but no one did. The empire had changed. Priorities had shifted. The curiosity that once defined Alexandria gave way to dogma and decay. The flame of learning wasn't extinguished in a night. It simply stopped being fed. That's why historians call it the fire that never stopped. Because long after the smoke cleared, the real burning continued, not in wood or papyrus, but in hearts that no longer cared to know. Every time a ruler silenced a thinker, every time a scroll was left to rot instead of being copied, every time a question was met with fear instead of wonder, the fire burned again. It's strange to think that the greatest library in history didn't vanish in one apocalypse, but in a series of small abandonments. Imagine a scribe sitting at his desk, half-finished scroll before him, hearing the city's noise outside, the merchants, the soldiers, the calls to prayer, and deciding that tomorrow he might finish it. And then tomorrow never comes. The ink dries, the papyrus cracks, centuries pass. A wind from the sea blows through the ruins, and the last traces of handwriting turn to dust. Even the memory of the library began to fade. Later generations spoke of it with awe, but few could say where it had stood or what had been lost. Its location became legend, its details myth. The greatest archive of human knowledge vanished so completely that scholars still argue about what was in it. It's as if the earth itself conspired to erase the evidence of how much we once knew, and yet there's a haunting beauty in that mystery. Because the library's story isn't just about loss, it's about the fragility of civilization and its resilience. The knowledge it once held didn't disappear entirely. Much of it survived through copies carried elsewhere, through translations and retellings. When the scholars of Baghdad built their own house of wisdom centuries later, they were continuing the same tradition. When monks in Europe copied Greek texts through the Middle Ages, they were saving embers from that same fire. Even in its absence, the library's spirit kept finding ways to live. Still, one cannot help but wonder, how much more could humanity have known if the library had survived intact? What discoveries were buried forever in those ashes? Did some Alexandrian philosopher already grasp the motion of planets long before Copernicus? Did some lost treatise describe machines centuries ahead of their time? We'll never know. The silence left by those missing voices is immeasurable. But maybe the deeper tragedy isn't just the loss of specific scrolls. Maybe it's that the world allowed such a light to fade at all. The Library of Alexandria was more than a building. It was a symbol of what humanity can be when curiosity outweighs fear, when learning matters more than power. To lose it was to lose part of ourselves, a mirror that once reflected our highest potential. And yet, history has a way of echoing. Each time we choose ignorance over understanding, we relive that slow burn. When knowledge is hoarded instead of shared, when truth is silenced because it's inconvenient, when curiosity is mocked or politicized, we build our own little fires. The destruction of the library isn't an event locked in the past. It's a warning written in smoke across every age that follows. Even now, in our own time, surrounded by the vast digital libraries of the modern world, the same danger exists. The fire no longer needs to be physical. It can take the form of neglect, misinformation, indifference. Data can vanish with the crash of a server. Books can go unread. Ideas can be drowned in noise. The lesson of Alexandria is that knowledge must be tended, actively, lovingly, or it dies the same quiet death it did before. But there's another side to this story, a spark that refuses to go out. Because despite everything, the dream of Alexandria never completely disappeared. Centuries later, scholars in Egypt and beyond began to speak again of a great library by the sea. And in 2002, on that same shore where Alexander once stood, the Bibliotheca Alexandrina opened its doors, a modern resurrection. Its curved walls rise like a sunrise from the earth, engraved with scripts from every known language. Inside, light floods through glass ceilings onto millions of books. It stands as both memorial and promise, proof that even if fire can destroy paper, it cannot destroy the hunger to know. Standing there today, you can almost feel the ghosts of the past, the murmur of scholars debating beneath marble columns, the scent of papyrus and salt, the hum of thought. The modern readers who pass between shelves are part of the same continuum, carrying forward the flame that flickered but never truly went out. In them, the fire burns again, not the fire of destruction, but the fire of curiosity. Maybe that's the paradox at the heart of Alexandria's story. The same element that destroyed it, fire, is also the perfect symbol of what it represented. Knowledge is like flame. It gives light, it spreads, it warms, but it must be fed and protected. Left unattended, it consumes itself or fades to embers. Nurtured, it illuminates the world. So perhaps the library didn't die after all. Perhaps it transformed. Perhaps its spirit escaped the smoke and found refuge in every library that followed, every classroom, every mind that dares to ask why. Perhaps every time a child opens a book, every time a scientist tests an idea, every time someone searches for truth despite the odds, the Library of Alexandria breathes again. The fire that never stopped isn't only the fire of destruction, it's also the fire of endurance, the eternal spark of inquiry that no empire, no religion, no neglect can ever completely smother. The story of Alexandria reminds us that knowledge is both fragile and unstoppable, that it can burn and still survive, that it lives wherever someone chooses to remember. And so, when we speak of the library's burning, we should not only mourn what was lost. We should also recognize what remains, the unbroken chain of curiosity stretching from those ancient scrolls to us. For though the walls fell and the papyrus turned to ash, the dream that built the library still stands. It stands every time we seek to understand, every time we preserve, every time we learn. The fire that never stopped burns in our own hands now. It is the same flame that once flickered in the oil lamps of Alexandria, the same glow that guided scholars through the dark. It can destroy or it can illuminate. Which one it becomes depends on us. The library's ashes lie somewhere beneath the modern city, mixed with sand and salt and time. But its light, that impossible defiant light, still shines over the sea. You can see it in the eyes of anyone who looks toward the horizon and wonders. Because the fire that ended Alexandria was never just fire. It was forgetting. And the fire that keeps it alive is remembering. And as long as we remember, as long as we care, the Library of Alexandria will never truly be gone. They say when the Library of Alexandria burned, it wasn't just a city that lost something, it was the human race. Because what went up in that smoke wasn't only papyrus and ink, it was possibility, the future itself, curling away into the night sky. The fire didn't just burn scrolls, it burned what might have been. Imagine standing there as the flames rose. The air thick with ash, the glow of burning manuscripts, turning the sea red. Somewhere in that inferno were ideas that had never been read, discoveries that had never been shared, words that might have changed everything. We don't know their titles, we'll never know their authors, but their absence still echoes through time. For what was lost in Alexandria wasn't just knowledge, it was the shape of human thought. The scrolls that lined those shelves contained centuries of accumulated wisdom, from Egypt's priests who measured the stars to Babylonian astronomers charting the heavens, from Greek philosophers asking what it means to exist to Indian mathematicians exploring the infinite. All of it, gone. The map of our understanding was torn apart, leaving blank spaces where entire civilizations once spoke. We often think of history as a straight line, one discovery leading to the next. But Alexandria reminds us it isn't. Knowledge doesn't just grow. It can also disappear. It can burn, and with it the very roads that might have led us further. When those scrolls turned to ash, humanity's path forked into shadows. We had to find our way again centuries later with only fragments to guide us. Some of those fragments survived, enough to hint at what we lost. Ancient writers quoted works that no longer exist, names that now live only as echoes. There were entire plays of Sophocles and Euripides that vanished, entire histories written by authors whose names we barely remember. Of the hundreds of tragedies performed in Athens' golden age, only a handful remain. What beauty, what insight, what laughter and grief might have filled those missing pages. We'll never hear their voices again. And it wasn't only art. The loss reached into science, mathematics, and philosophy, the building blocks of civilization. Among the ashes could have been treatises that anticipated discoveries we now call modern. The Alexandrian astronomers, studying the heavens without telescopes, already knew the Earth was round, already measured its circumference, already mapped the stars visible to their eyes. What if they had gone further? What if they had discovered the movement of planets centuries before Copernicus? What if they had seen patterns we've only just begun to understand? There may have been works on medicine, cures for diseases, insights into anatomy, perhaps even early understandings of infection or the circulation of blood. The physicians of Alexandria performed dissections, something almost unthinkable in their time. They studied nerves, organs, the pulse. How far could that knowledge have gone if their writings had survived? How many lives might have been saved? How much suffering spared if those scrolls had reached future generations intact? In those ashes, there might have been mathematical systems that never re-emerged, equations, proofs, or methods of calculation that could have propelled technology forward by centuries. Alexandria's scholars experimented with lenses, hydraulics, mechanics. Some believe there were even designs for machines that used steam, primitive engines, centuries ahead of their time. We can only imagine what inventions might have followed. If that knowledge had been preserved, the Industrial Revolution, the age of exploration, perhaps even space travel, all might have come earlier. The course of history could have shifted completely. But the loss wasn't only practical, it was spiritual. Within those scrolls lay philosophies that questioned the very nature of existence, texts that explored what it means to be human, what truth is, how societies should live together, ideas that could have shaped ethics, politics, religion, the entire framework of civilization. The library held works from every corner of the known world. Within those walls, Greek reason met Egyptian mysticism, Persian astronomy met Indian logic, African theology met Mediterranean poetry. That meeting, that blending of thought, was the greatest experiment in human understanding ever attempted. And it ended in silence. We tend to think that the destruction of knowledge is something the past left behind. But Alexandria shows us how fragile knowledge really is. It doesn't die only through fire or war. It dies when we stop listening. It dies when we choose comfort over curiosity, certainty over wonder. The library didn't just vanish because someone set it ablaze. It vanished because over time, people stopped protecting it. The passion that built it dimmed, and once that flame goes out, even the brightest civilization can fall into darkness. For more than 1,000 years after its fall, humanity struggled to recover what Alexandria once knew. Greek science, once thriving, faded into obscurity. Astronomy regressed. Medicine turned to superstition. The philosophies that had questioned nature and logic gave way to dogma and authority. It wasn't until the Islamic Golden Age, nearly a millennium later, that scholars began to gather and translate what little remained of those lost works, preserving, in Arabic, the last embers of the ancient light. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad became a kind of second Alexandria, but even then the translators could feel the gaps. They wrote of texts that no one could find, theories that had no surviving source, names that existed only in rumor. That's the true weight of Alexandria's loss, not only the destruction of knowledge but the creation of ignorance. A wound. In the timeline of human progress, imagine what the world might look like if we had never lost those centuries of discovery. How much sooner could we have reached the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the modern age? How many ideas had to be reinvented, rediscovered because their originals were gone? The fire didn't just burn the past, it burned the future. And yet, there's a cruel poetry in it, because fire, after all, is transformation. The ashes of Alexandria didn't disappear completely. They scattered, across continents, across Centuries. The spirit of curiosity that built that library never died. It took root in other places, in other minds. You can trace its faint glow through history, in the scholars of Baghdad, in the monks of Ireland, in the scientists of Florence, in every thinker who ever tried to piece the puzzle back together. The library burned, yes, but its idea, that knowledge belongs to everyone, that truth should be gathered and shared, refused to die. Still, one can't help but wonder about the things we'll never know. Did someone, somewhere in those scrolls, already understand that the earth moved around the sun? Did they map the stars beyond what we can see with the naked eye? Did they write poems that could have changed the way we love? Plays that could have reshaped our empathy? Philosophies that might have made us kinder, wiser, braver? Each missing work is a universe that never came into being. Each lost thought is a silence we still live inside. The loss of knowledge is never just about information. It's about imagination. When knowledge dies, so do the dreams it could have inspired. Think of all the inventors who might have found guidance in those pages, the artists who might have discovered new forms, the scientists who might have seen further because someone before them had already drawn the map. Every innovation that never happened, every question that was never asked, those too are victims of the fire. And there's something almost unbearable in that thought. Because knowledge, unlike gold or stone, is alive only when it's shared. It must be passed on, spoken, written, remembered. Once that chain breaks, even for a generation, an entire lineage of thought can vanish. The scrolls of Alexandria were not merely objects. They were voices reaching through time. And when they burned, those voices fell silent forever. Yet, paradoxically, the memory of that silence became one of history's greatest teachers. The story of the library's destruction has haunted humanity for 2,000 years. Every scholar, every librarian, every scientist who has ever worked to preserve knowledge has done so with that image in mind, the flames rising, the words disappearing. The tragedy of Alexandria became a warning that wisdom must be protected, not only from war but from neglect, from arrogance, from forgetting. In that sense, the library's loss gave birth to a kind of vigilance. It taught us to value knowledge not just as power but as identity. Civilizations may rise and fall, but what defines them, what truly endures, are their ideas. Without them, the pyramids are just stone, the statues just metal. It's the words, the thoughts, the shared understanding that make us human. Alexandria was built on that belief. And though its walls are gone, that belief remains. Even now, when we build archives, universities, and digital databases that span the globe, we are still trying to rebuild what was lost. We gather the fragments of human understanding and try to make them whole again. But somewhere deep down, we know that there will always be missing pieces, holes left by the fire. The Library of Alexandria reminds us that knowledge is not infinite. It must be earned, preserved, renewed. It reminds us how easily progress can be undone, how quickly light can fade. But maybe the most important lesson is this, that knowledge isn't something we inherit passively. It's something we must choose to protect. Because the same fire that consumed Alexandria still burns, in ignorance, in censorship, in apathy. And every time a book is banned, every time a truth is silenced, every time we stop asking questions, that old fire flickers to life again. The loss of knowledge isn't only a story from the past, it's a danger that waits in every age, including our own. If the library had survived, perhaps we would live in a different world, a world where wisdom grew without interruption, where light never dimmed. But perhaps its destruction was also a test, to see if we would learn to value what was lost, to see if, having seen the ashes, we would finally understand the cost of letting knowledge die, and we have learned, at least a little. We've built systems to preserve information that no fire can destroy, digital archives, satellites, networks that carry human thought around the world in an instant. But we've also learned that storage is not the same as understanding. Knowledge isn't measured by how much data we keep, but by how deeply we care to seek truth. The library's true lesson isn't just about saving information, it's about nurturing curiosity. Because once curiosity dies, the fire doesn't need to burn. The darkness comes on its own. So when we remember the Library of Alexandria, we shouldn't only mourn its loss. We should also honor its dream, the dream that knowledge could unite humanity, that the wisdom of one culture could illuminate another, that the act of learning is the highest form of hope. Those scrolls, those fragile rolls of papyrus, held more than words. They held that hope. And even though the flames devoured them, the hope remains. In the end, the loss of knowledge was not total, because we still remember the loss itself, and in remembering, we keep its meaning alive. The library's story is written not in the text that survived, but in the longing for what didn't. It's a reminder that every idea we save, every truth we pass on, every spark of understanding we share, all of it matters. Because somewhere in some forgotten corner of history, a voice once tried to do the same, and the fire took it away. So maybe the real task of every generation is to rebuild Alexandria, not its marble halls or its towering shelves, but its spirit. To gather the scattered pieces of wisdom and keep them safe, to ensure that the next fire, whatever form it takes, never finds them unguarded. Because what burned in that ancient city wasn't just the past, it was a warning to the future. The Library of Alexandria may be gone, but its lesson endures. That knowledge is both fragile and sacred, that ignorance is the truest fire, and that the loss of knowledge is the one tragedy we must never let repeat. They thought the fire had ended, it all, that when the last scroll turned to ash, the dream of Alexandria was gone forever. But dreams have a strange way of surviving. They don't always need walls of marble or shelves of papyrus to endure. Sometimes all they need is memory, a whisper carried through time, a spark that refuses to die. The Library of Alexandria was destroyed, yes, but its idea, that lived on. Like embers carried by the wind, it drifted across the centuries, lighting new fires wherever it landed. The spirit of Alexandria could not be buried in smoke and ruin. It was too vast, too luminous. Somewhere in the silence after the fire, people remembered. They remembered that once there was a place where the entire world came together to learn. They remembered the scholars who sought truth not for power, but for understanding. And though the library's shelves were empty, its vision still echoed, faint but unbroken, through the corridors of time. Those echoes would find new homes, in cities far from Egypt's coast, in minds that never saw its shining halls, yet somehow felt its pulse. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. The Mediterranean world fractured into kingdoms and caliphates, each claiming pieces of what the old world had known. But in the 9th century, in a city on the banks of another great river, the Tigris, the light of Alexandria flickered back to life. Its name was Baghdad, and it became the heart of a new golden age. The caliphs of the Abbasid dynasty dreamed of knowledge as the Greeks once did. They gathered scholars from every corner of their empire. Persians, Arabs, Jews, Syrians, Greeks, Indians, men of many tongues but one shared purpose, to understand. In the heart of Baghdad stood the Bait al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. To walk through its doors was to step into Alexandria reborn. There were no marble pillars or pharaohs here, but the same spirit filled the air, the belief that learning was sacred, that the universe could be read like a divine book if only one learned its language. The scholars of Baghdad became heirs to the forgotten world. They scoured ancient manuscripts, hunted down surviving Greek texts, and began translating them into Arabic. Works of Plato, Aristotle, Galen, Ptolemy, what little remained of the ancient world's brilliance, were saved, copied, studied, and expanded upon. But they didn't stop there. They didn't just preserve the wisdom of Alexandria, they built upon it. They questioned it, tested it, refined it. Where the Greeks had speculated, they experimented. Where philosophy had stopped at theory, they reached for proof. They invented algebra, charted the stars with precision unknown before, mapped the earth and explored optics, chemistry, and medicine with a new kind of rigor. The great polymath Al-Kindi spoke of the universal harmony between philosophy and faith. Al-Khwarizmi, whose name gave birth to the word algorithm, laid the mathematical foundations for the digital age centuries before it would dawn. Ibn al-Haytham studied light and vision, discovering that sight was not a ray emitted by the eyes, as the Greeks had thought, but light entering them, the birth of modern optics. Each of them, knowingly or not, was echoing Alexandria's dream. The House of Wisdom was not merely a place of study. It was a conversation across centuries between the lost scholars of the past and the seekers of the present. The flame had moved from Egypt to Mesopotamia, and it burned brighter than ever. But history, relentless as the tide, shifted again. Baghdad's glory faded under invasions and wars. The Mongols came and the Tigris ran black with ink from the books that were thrown into it. For a moment it seemed as if the world had forgotten once more. Yet the light, though scattered, kept moving westward this time, across deserts and seas, toward another city that would keep the echoes alive. That city was Córdoba, in Al-Andalus, Muslim Spain, where, under the Umayyads, another great library rose. In the 10th century, Córdoba was a jewel of the world, its streets lit by lamps while much of Europe lay in darkness. Here, too, knowledge was revered as divine. Scholars translated not only Greek works, but Persian, Indian, and Arabic ones, merging ideas from every culture. The libraries of Córdoba held hundreds of thousands of volumes: medicine, astronomy, mathematics, philosophy, poetry. Students came from every faith and background. Christian monks sat beside Muslim philosophers. Jewish physicians debated with Arab astronomers. It was a city of ideas, a living crossroads where words replaced weapons and questions replaced wars. In the shadow of the great mosque, knowledge was not merely preserved, it flourished. The dream of Alexandria had traveled far, but its soul remained unchanged, a belief in unity through learning. From Córdoba, the flame spread further still, across the Pyrenees, into Europe. There, the echoes of Alexandria began to awaken minds that had long slept through the dark centuries. Translations from Arabic to Latin carried not only the lost works of Aristotle and Euclid, but also the discoveries of Muslim thinkers who had expanded them. These texts reached scholars in Paris, Bologna, and Oxford, sparking the slow dawn of what would become the Renaissance. Europe, reborn through the knowledge preserved by others, began to rediscover its forgotten inheritance. In Italy, the light that had once burned in Alexandria found new form in humanism, the celebration of reason, art, and curiosity. Renaissance scholars like Petrarch, Da Vinci, Galileo, and Copernicus were not starting from nothing. They were building upon layers of rediscovered wisdom, much of which had traveled a long, winding road, from Athens to Alexandria, from Alexandria to Baghdad, from Baghdad to Córdoba, and from Córdoba to the universities of Europe. Leonardo da Vinci, sketching the anatomy of the human body with obsessive precision, was echoing Herophilus, the Alexandrian physician, who had dissected the first human cadavers. Galileo, pointing his telescope to the heavens, was following in the footsteps of Ptolemy and Aristarchus, whose star charts once filled Alexandria's archives. Even the architects of the scientific method, men like Bacon and Descartes, were heirs to an idea older than any of them. That knowledge grows through questioning, not through obedience. That idea was born in Alexandria. And so, though the library's marble halls crumbled into dust, its heartbeat never stopped. It simply changed form. It became invisible, woven into the bloodstream of civilization. Each generation that reached for understanding was, in its own way, rebuilding Alexandria, not with stone but with thought. By the time the Enlightenment dawned, that echo had grown into a chorus. Philosophers began to speak of universal knowledge, of reason as the highest good, of the power of education to lift humanity. In Paris, London, and Berlin, libraries multiplied. Books that once took months to copy could now be printed in hours. The dream that knowledge could belong to all, not just the privileged few, began to take hold. And behind that dream, faint but present, was the shadow of the Library of Alexandria. the first great attempt to gather all human knowledge under one roof. Even as the centuries rolled forward, the echo never faded. When scientists mapped the human genome, when astronomers sent telescopes into space, when mathematicians built the foundations of the digital age, they were all, knowingly or not, walking the same path that began beside the harbor of an ancient Egyptian city. The form had changed. Ink replaced papyrus, screens replaced scrolls, but the yearning remained the same: to know, to understand, to preserve. The spirit of Alexandria lives today in every library, every university, every research lab that refuses to let ignorance reign. It lives in the quiet hum of servers storing the world's knowledge, in the fingers of a child turning the pages of a book, in the voice of a teacher explaining the stars. It lives wherever curiosity survives. And yet that survival wasn't guaranteed. At every stage, the light could have gone out. The house of wisdom could have burned unnoticed. Cordoba could have fallen into silence without passing on its scrolls. The translators of Toledo could have chosen faith over inquiry. But they didn't. At each turning point, someone, some unknown scholar, some forgotten scribe, chose to keep the flame alive. We owe everything to them. When we think of progress, we often imagine great leaps, inventions, revolutions, discoveries. But progress is also the quiet persistence of memory, the refusal to let wisdom die. The Library of Alexandria may have been destroyed, but the memory of what it represented became indestructible. Its loss taught humanity the price of forgetting, and its echo taught us the value of remembering. In that sense, the fire that once consumed it also forged something new, a shared determination that knowledge should never again be allowed to perish so easily. That's why when the modern Bibliotheca Alexandrina was built on the same shore in 2002, it wasn't just an act of archaeology. It was a resurrection, a statement that the light still burns. Look around the world today and you'll see the same echo, scattered but alive. In the data centers that store billions of books and documents, in the open-access archives that make knowledge free to anyone with an internet connection, in the scientists collaborating across borders, in the students studying ideas born thousands of years before their time. Each of them is a spark of Alexandria, tiny, luminous, defiant, and perhaps that's the greatest legacy of all. Because knowledge, once freed from the walls that held it, can travel anywhere. It doesn't need marble columns or royal patrons. It lives in minds, in hearts, in questions whispered in classrooms and laboratories around the world. The dream that began on the shores of Egypt has become the shared inheritance of all humanity. The spirit of Alexandria survived not because of what it built, but because of what it inspired. It taught us that the pursuit of knowledge is not bound by time or place. It is a fire that leaps from generation to generation, crossing languages, faiths, and borders. Its light can dim, but it never truly dies. Because as long as one person looks at the stars and wonders why, Alexandria lives again. And so, though its stones have vanished and its scrolls are dust, its echo still shapes the world. It whispers in the silence of every library, hums beneath the glow of every screen, lingers in the voice of every teacher who dares to ignite curiosity. The light that once rose from the ancient harbor still shines, scattered, yes, but never extinguished, because in the end the Library of Alexandria was never just a building. It was a promise that knowledge can outlast destruction, that truth can survive chaos, and that even the smallest echo can carry light across millennia. And that promise remains. The Library of Alexandria did not die in vain. Its ashes, scattered by wind and time, carried more than the scent of loss. They carried a lesson. A warning, yes, but also a quiet, enduring hope. Because in every story of destruction, there is always a whisper of creation. And though the library fell, though its scrolls turned to dust and its marble halls crumbled, something of it survived, not in the ruins, but in us. The fall of Alexandria teaches that knowledge is fragile. It can be burned, banned, buried. It can vanish in the space between generations, lost not just to fire but to forgetfulness. Every civilization learns this lesson eventually, that no truth is permanent unless it is protected, that wisdom is as mortal as the people who guard it. But in that fragility lies something sacred, because what we can lose we learn to cherish. For centuries people have looked at the story of the library and seen tragedy. The flames, the scrolls curling into smoke, the silence that followed. But if you look closer, beneath the ashes there is something else, a heartbeat that never stopped. The very fact that we still mourn its loss 2,000 years later means that its spirit survived. We remember because we care. We care because deep down, we understand what was really lost. Not just knowledge, but the proof that human curiosity once united the world. Curiosity, that is what endures. The fire may have consumed the paper, but it could not consume the question, what else is there to know? That single question is indestructible. It passed from the scholars of Alexandria to the thinkers of Baghdad, from the scribes of Cordoba to the scientists of Florence, and from them to us. Every time we ask why, every time we refuse to accept ignorance, we rebuild a piece of that lost library. The ashes of Alexandria are in every page we turn, every experiment we begin, every idea we dare to test. They remind us that knowledge is not a possession. It's a pursuit. It's not something we have. It's something we do. The people of Alexandria understood that. They gathered the world's wisdom not because they had all the answers, but because they believed every question mattered. That belief is the foundation of progress, but the ashes also speak a warning. They tell us that curiosity must be protected from apathy, from arrogance, from fear. The library did not vanish only because of war. It vanished because over time the passion that built it dimmed. Scholars left, patrons changed, priorities shifted. Neglect did what flames began. The light faded not with an explosion, but with silence. And silence remains the greatest enemy of knowledge. That's the lesson the ashes whisper, that enlightenment is not guaranteed. Civilization doesn't always move forward. Sometimes it forgets. Sometimes it falls asleep. We assume that progress is inevitable, but Alexandria's ruins remind us that it is not. Every generation must decide whether to keep the flame burning or let it die. And so, the lesson becomes personal. It's not only about empires and libraries, it's about choices we make every day. Every time we read a book instead of scrolling past it. Every time we question instead of accepting. Every time we listen, learn, teach, share, we defy the ashes. We rebuild what the fire destroyed. We become, each of us, a guardian of Alexandria's spirit. Because knowledge, no matter how vast, begins small. It begins with a single word written down, a single mind daring to wonder. The library was once just that, a dream, born in the heart of a king who believed the world's wisdom could be gathered in one place. That dream changed humanity. And though the building is gone, the dream still calls to us. Every school, every library, every database, every conversation is its echo. In the quiet of a modern library, surrounded by rows of books, it's easy to forget how fragile this all is. The hum of air conditioning, the neat order of shelves, it feels permanent, but it isn't. It never was. Knowledge survives only because people keep it alive. Every book here was written, printed, protected, and passed down by someone who refused to let ignorance win. Behind every page is an act of defiance against the darkness that once consumed Alexandria. And maybe that's the most powerful thing of all, the idea that learning itself is rebellion. To seek knowledge is to resist forgetting. To teach is to fight the fire with words. To read is to resurrect voices thought lost. Every act of curiosity is a spark, small but unstoppable. The ashes of Alexandria are not only a warning, they are soil. From them, countless other libraries grew. The great collections of Baghdad, Cordoba, Paris, Oxford, and even the digital archives of today, all of them are roots reaching back into that ancient earth. Every time a scientist uncovers a truth, every time a child learns to read, the seeds planted in those ashes bloom again, and still the warning remains. In our world, knowledge has never been more abundant, but abundance brings its own danger. The library burned once because it was fragile. Today our libraries are vast and invisible, stored in clouds of data, scattered across the internet. But fragility remains, not in parchment but in attention. The fire we face now is not one of flame, but of distraction and indifference. We risk losing not what we don't have, but what we no longer value. That is Alexandria's final lesson. That knowledge cannot survive without love. It must be nurtured, protected, shared. It cannot exist in isolation. The library was never meant to be a vault. It was meant to be a living thing, a conversation between minds. When that conversation stops, the fire returns. So when we remember the library, we should not only grieve its loss, we should honor its courage. The courage to seek understanding in a world that often feared it. The courage to believe that wisdom could be gathered from every culture, every people, every voice. That courage still lives, waiting for us to claim it. Perhaps that is why the story endures. Because in every age, humanity faces the same choice, to protect knowledge or to let it burn. The details change, the tools evolve, but the question remains. And as long as someone remembers the ashes, there is hope that the light will not fade again. The Library of Alexandria was not destroyed in one night, nor can it be rebuilt in one. But it can be rebuilt, piece by piece, question by question, reader by reader. Every book we open, every story we tell is an act of resurrection. The fire took the words, but not the will to learn. The will remains. And so, beneath all the tragedy, there is something profoundly beautiful about its story. Because even in destruction, it taught us how to begin again. It showed us that knowledge is not a monument. It's a living flame, passed from hand to hand, generation to generation. As long as that flame survives, Alexandria lives. So perhaps the lesson of the ashes is not just to mourn what was lost, but to recognize what was found. The understanding that curiosity itself is eternal. Empires fall, scrolls burn, languages vanish, but the urge to know never dies. It may flicker, it may fade, but it always finds its way back into the human heart. That is the true legacy of Alexandria. Not the marble, not the scrolls, not even the scholars whose names time erased. Its legacy is the endless, unbreakable chain of wonder that connects us all. The knowledge that every question leads to another, that every answer opens a new door. That learning is both the journey and the reward. And if you listen closely, in a library, in a classroom, in the hum of a server farm, or the turning of a page, you can still hear it. The faint crackle of that ancient flame whispering through the centuries. A voice that says softly but clearly, keep going, don't stop learning. Don't let the fire die. Because every time we seek to understand the world, every time we choose curiosity over fear, light over silence, we rebuild, in our own small way, the Library of Alexandria. And that is the lesson of the ashes.